Mainstream networks are broadcasting continuous coverage of the global peace talks. Yet in the physical world, global trade corridors are actively collapsing under hostile fire. Institutions rely on legacy media outputs to gauge global stability, feeding algorithms that generate a Narrative Control Index, or NCI. This metric functions by smoothing over chaotic, localized data points to present a sanitized view of geopolitical health. But raw open-source intelligence, or OSINT, proves the Strait of Hormuz is under a total maritime lockdown, a reality missing from the sanitized reporting. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps actively enforces this blockade. Fast boats utilize live fire, seizing commercial vessels, backed by overlapping drone swarms and targeted electronic interference. The diplomatic optimism broadcast on legacy channels is a linguistic mirage. It is actively blinding corporate and government institutions to a catastrophic logistical failure happening in real time. To navigate this environment, analysts must quantify the exact mathematical gap between the sanitized narrative optics and the physical ground truth. Strategic friction mathematically measures the reality gap. The ratio pits the narrative indexed against raw OSINT. We multiply this by physical disruptors, regional GPS jamming, and fuel anomalies. April 2026 yields a stark output. Official narratives are detached by 4.8x. Operating inside a 4.8x reality gap means standard news feeds are a liability. Extracting accurate intelligence requires completely abandoning them to build a three-tiered analytical framework known as the friction stack. The foundation of the friction stack is the tactical layer. Right now, the tactical center of gravity is the Strait of Hormuz. Live tactical mapping grids utilize automated scraping combined with rapid human verification to log incidents immediately. This approach consistently outpaces the editorial review cycles of legacy reporting by at least 48 hours. This tactical vector map of the Persian Gulf displays expanding areas of severe GPS jamming. These markers are the leading indicators of imminent offensive operations. GNSS disruption warnings further complicate this, creating a layered threat set of overlapping interference zones. Analysts cross-reference these interference zones with civilian transponder data. When automatic identification systems, or AIS, are abruptly switched off in a concentrated area, it creates a dark sector on the map, pointing directly to vessels disappearing from the grid. Raw data from these sectors reveals commercial shipping volume through the strait has plummeted to a mere 5% of standard capacity. Tactical data confirms a terminal ligation of the strait, a surgical shutdown of this global trade artery. Once the tactical ground truth is established, the friction stack shifts to the strategic layer, translating physical ground movements into an assessment of command intent. This introduces cognitive warfare. This strategy involves executing physical military maneuvers specifically to manipulate an adversary's perception and skew their narrative indices. Tactical data reveals the Kremlin's recent injection of 20,000 troops into southeastern Ukraine is a shaping operation designed to exploit media deadlines rather than a defensive posture. Iran's operations in the Gulf serve a similar strategic purpose. Their physical chokehold on the strait is a leverage play to force the lifting of U.S. counter-blockades without yielding a single nuclear concession. Military analysts classify these coordinated multi-theater actions as a campaign of compellence aimed directly at stretching and destabilizing NATO command structures. Strategic intent reveals synchronized operations across Europe and the Middle East, specifically timed to exploit the blind spots of narrative-driven media. The final tier of the friction stack elevates the analysis to the macroeconomic layer, tracing how localized military friction forcefully triggers broad economic statecraft. The immediate primary consequence of the Gulf ligation is a historic global energy shock, hitting markets that assumed supply lines were secure. The International Energy Agency has already classified this event as the largest sudden supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. This chart tracks the commodity data. Brent crude prices have violently surged past $120 per barrel. Compounding this oil spike is a total cessation of liquid natural gas export volume following a force majeure declaration over Qatari outputs. This combination of severe fuel price spikes and absolute export freezes has initiated the systemic collapse of the economic model sustaining the Gulf Cooperation Council. Traditional media stops at the energy shock, completely missing what analysts call secondary friction. This is the nonlinear, often invisible economic fallout cascading through tangential supply chains. The critical blind spot in the April 2026 crisis is the global helium supply crisis. The Ras Laffan energy hub in Qatar serves as the world's primary extraction point for helium gas, a critical byproduct of its natural gas processing. Because of the physical damage at Ras Laffan and the subsequent maritime lockdown, 1/3 of the world's entire helium supply is now abruptly offline. Helium is a strictly non-substitutable resource required for cooling the specialized equipment used in the manufacturing of advanced semiconductors. This node map traces the supply route from the Gulf to high-tech manufacturing centers. The loss of Qatari exports heavily constricts the pipeline feeding East Asia. Without helium for cooling, foundries in Japan and South Korea face imminent industrial arrest. Through the mechanics of secondary friction, an offshore tactical blockade in the Middle East directly engineers a catastrophic bottleneck in global AI infrastructure. There is a perilous disconnect between the legacy media's insistence that diplomatic talks are making progress and the physical reality of severed trade arteries. The causal chain is clear. Tactical red lines enforced by fast boats in Hormuz directly cause broken economic supply lines out of the Ras Laffan energy hub. Those broken supply lines manifest as fatal warning states over East Asian semiconductor foundries that can no longer source necessary industrial gases. The mathematically inevitable forecast is a massive supply chain spark. Within 1 week, this helium infarct will cripple the global tech market. Utilizing narrative consensus as a metric for supply chain continuity in this environment guarantees catastrophic operational failure. This is aletheia, the unconcealed truth. Extracting this reality requires bypassing the narrative entirely and utilizing the friction stack. The definitive reality is clear. Physical mines are in the water, drone swarms are actively hunting targets, and global logistics are ligated. Institutional strategy must be anchored strictly to leading tactical indicators, prioritizing AIS dark sectors and GPS jamming patterns over official state communications. For geopolitical and supply chain analysts, the operational directive is simple: hold the hard steel of raw data and ignore the linguistic mirage. In an era of engineered narrative detachment, true risk analysis requires accepting the permanent lockdown of the old system to survive what comes next.